He is in the middle of a juicy opportunity to hit her on his absolute best issue, and she totally melts down his brain.
She is offering up the social proof as a permission structure to anybody who is a Republican or who has respect for Republicans.
This was the most useful thing that I ever learned, that there are 4 types of attitude change.
What our research has validated is the best approach. Put the voter at the center of the story, and whatever story you're trying to tell, make them the hero.
It's like the greatest hits of the Republic. It's like MAGA bingo, I think is what you called it.
It was really smart timing of her to infuse that right before he was about to have a strong moment to ensure that he tanked.
This is The War to Win Minds,
a limited series about how the political battle is really won and lost inside our brain.
I'm Matt Robison, writer, podcaster, and former campaign manager.
And I'm Lauren Goldstein, a psychologist and pollster for change research.
This is episode 5, the final episode in our War to Win Minds miniseries, and the second installment of our 2-part look at the nuclear bomb of persuasion that went off in the big presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. In the first part, we hit so many persuasion techniques: personalizing, salience, authority, credibility, social proof, valence issues, and storytelling. Now, we're going to complete the puzzle by looking at the rest of the debate and get into the power of being counterintuitive, the importance of liking, empathy, listening, reciprocation, scarcity, and above all, knowing the audience that you're trying to persuade and which of the 4 types of attitude change you're trying to accomplish. We're packing in so much psychology into this episode, including Kamala Harris's best and most brilliant moment of the whole debate, in which she pulled off a perfect trifecta of psychology. Before we dive in, I just want to say thank you to my co-host Lauren Goldstein and the folks at Change Research for being part of this, and Cliff Schechter at the Cliff's Edge channel on YouTube, which has been hosting all of these videos and really supporting this idea. And look, this isn't the usual kind of thing that I do on my podcast, Beyond Politics. This isn't the usual kind of video that you see at Cliff's Edge. But if you like this kind of more nuanced, deep dive kind of stuff, please take just a moment and share this. Subscribe to the pod or the YouTube channel or both. And above all, let us know. Leave a comment, send an email. Tell us what kind of thing you want to hear more about. One of the things we cover in this episode is that the audience is always in charge. And we believe that. And we'd be happy to bring you more of what you want. And with that, let's bring in Lauren. The proof of the fact that she got deep into his brain is we got next to perhaps the standout, memeable, viral moment of the debate.
Don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
We remind ourselves that any undecided voters that tuned into this debate, undecided voters on average, have less information about the candidates and are paying less close attention to politics in general. I only knew about that a few hours before the debate, this nonsense about pet eating in Springfield and the new incredibly racist conspiracy theory. I only found out about that a few hours before. And I'm like clued in on this stuff fairly well. What do you think an undecided voter that is not paying close attention to politics made of that moment? What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Well, and can I just say to our Republican friends out there that if you are one of those easily triggered delicate doilies who said, oh, they fact-checked him. How could they fact-check him? Will nobody think of the children? Can I just say that if you're making up insane racist bullshit, yes, you need to be fact-checked. And if you're complaining about the fact that they fact-checked Trump more than Harris, it's because he lied 33 times, according to fact checkers. She lied once. What happens when you lie is that you're the one who gets fact checked. It's hard to fact check someone who is saying actual facts. But now I'm digressing. And that's exactly what happened to Donald Trump, because the overarching question there was about immigration. Put on your Change Research polling hat. You know that this is one of the top areas of vulnerability for Democrats. It just is. That's just an area where we have some work to do, and there are things we can do and there are things we can say, but it's just Donald Trump's best turf.
Yeah.
Inflation, immigration, crime. That's what it's like the greatest hits of the Republic. It's like MAGA bingo, I think is what you called it, right? So he is in the middle of a juicy opportunity to hit her on his absolute best issue, and she totally melts down his brain into delivering this It was super effective.
Yeah, and that's why the precision timing of the crowd size jab was so well done, because she stuck it in there to ensure that rather than being able to hit his strength, he would take the bait and demonstrate to everybody his weaknesses because he doesn't have the discipline to stay on topic. So it was really smart timing of her to infuse that right before he was about to have a strong moment to ensure that he tanked. She baited him at the exact right moment to prevent him from being able to sort of have his moment of glory.
If there are fans out there of Sun Tzu and the art of war, this is something that comes up over and over again in this classic thousands and thousands of years old piece of warfare battle wisdom, which is pick the terrain you're fighting on, pick the turf you're fighting on. And it's also something that's very important in persuasion psychology. Speaking of psychological warfare, she really ratcheted up the psychological warfare from this point on. And the way she did it, I think, is really interesting and really worth looking at. So the lead into this clip here is that Trump at this point was totally rattled, and he got fact-checked on crime. David Muir said, he actually mansplained to another man. It was great. He said, actually, the FBI has shown that crime is going way down. And so that's the start off here, is that Trump is so rattled by David Muir now that he attacks the FBI, weird flex, and then
down in this country. But
excuse me, the FBI they would defraud.
Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But
excuse me, the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address.
So what was on the plate here? You have a serving of let's talk about crime, one of the best issues for Republicans, probably third best. I don't know. You tell me. You're the Change Research pollster, probably third best, right? And then Kamala Harris gives him a serving of let's talk about the fact that you're a convicted felon, and he says, "I'm going to help myself to some of the second thing here," and he passes up the first thing. And it's a jab, it's destabilizing. She triggers him and she leads him down the garden path into a long soliloquy about his own criminal record. What turf are they on now? She won the turf battle.
No question about it. And I want to call back to what I said at the beginning about how she narrated his strategy up front. And to your point about ensuring that we had a little bit more audience attention to the overarching framework. You're going to hear me talk about you, and you're going to hear him talk about himself, because that's all he cares about. And that is a beautiful framework. Here is an issue. Talk about how you're going to make people feel safe. And she says, well, he's going to make this about himself. She baits him to do it.
It worked in the other direction as well. Here, what we're about to see is she parries a question on fracking by stating her position, and then on the way out, delivering a psychological barb at Donald Trump.
I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times.
I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many billions of dollars, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison.
First of all, they're even surprised. You were good, Donald. Second of all, okay, Donald Trump is right. Donald Trump is right. Best I recall, he did not actually get 400 million. He got 250 million, which is technically, according to math, a fraction of 400 million. Here's a fun fact for people. Trump actually participated about 15 years ago in the Comedy Central roast. And he had one stipulation. You could make fun of anything about him. You could make fun of his hair. You could make fun of his weird descriptions of his own daughter. What you could not make fun of was his actual level of wealth. No jokes about whether or not he was actually a rich dude. He is so psychologically vulnerable on this point. And Kamala just takes, again, maybe this is like fourth biggest vulnerability for Democrats, because we're talking about Pennsylvania. We're talking about the swingiest of swing states, the state that has about a 1/3 chance of being the tipping point in this election. She's on this dangerous ground, and just on the way out, she just slips in this thing of, Donald, you didn't build this. And what does he do? He goes on this weird tangent, and you have the phrase of the year, MAGA Mad Libs. He does, what was it? Transgender surgeries for immigrant
illegal
criminals
immigrants in prison. I mean, it needs to be said. I'm sorry, I must fact check this. I mean, incarcerated individuals cannot get basic health care like Tylenol and tampons. This is not a thing that is happening with any frequency. Her strategy here was so smart. Anytime that you were on vulnerable ground, poke him about something he's insecure about, and he's going to take the bait. And that way he cannot capitalize on my weakness and hit me where it hurts, because he is not going to be able to resist talking about himself and defending himself. And you can kind of hear the debate prep people in his mind coming out as he's, well, we don't have to talk about that. We should talk about something else. He had to do it. And then he was, I'm supposed to pivot. Let me try to execute my pivot.
It's that classic Far Side where there's someone in a band. He's supposed to have two cymbals. He's the percussionist. He's only got one cymbal in his hand. He's clearly about to bang them together. He's got one cymbal in his hand, and he's thinking to himself, I won't screw up. I won't screw up. I won't screw up. And the caption is, Ernest screws up. Well, Donald screws up. That's all I can say. All right, talk about Mad Libs. This is sort of like the Mad Libs of psychology principles. Kamala gets them all in right here in this next upcoming little spiel.
Why, in this election, I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a 4-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the republic, would never survive another Trump.
It was spectacular. She cites authority, right? These are very high-ranking people, a 4-star general, a national security advisor, a former congressperson, a former vice president, important people of stature. And they are Republicans. She is offering up the social proof as a permission structure to anybody who is a Republican or who has respect for Republicans or who is in some way inclined towards Republicans in a positive way, to say, they did it, you can do it too. All the cool kids are doing it.
And I'll throw out that the reason that you see people in elections like this throw out endorsements from members of the other party is that it's a subtle counterintuitive. It's an attention getter. It's, you would never believe. And I saw this commentary. One of the pieces said, well, I was just guffawing at Democrats crowing over Dick Cheney's endorsement. They think he's the Prince of Darkness. Agreed. That's ironic, but that's also the point, right? It's that it's so counterintuitive. It's so attention getting that even this person, and counterintuitiveness, I mean, we could go on a whole show about counterintuitiveness. It's something that you can use yourself in disagreements, in arguments. I use this in a debate on the radio just yesterday, I was up against a Trump supporter and he said a bunch of stuff. I said, this is going to be surprising, but I actually agree with what you just said. I think you made a really good point. And there's no way that the audience is not going to pay attention to what I'm about to say next. If I had to pick one answer from Kamala, the one that I think was sort of the highest functioning cognitive processing in real time or amazing recall of prep that I saw in this whole debate was the discussion on race.
That the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. He owned land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. This is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other.
She starts on one theme. We're not divided. We don't want to see enemies in each other. We credit each other with not being racist. We're united. And then she goes into the middle part, which is jab and attack and Donald Trump's record. And then she returns to the elevated theme. I want to me, what jumped out is one of the core principles of any type of persuasion environment, any type of speaking role, knowing your audience and what they want. A shorthand for it is audience sovereignty. The audience are the queens and kings here. What they are interested in is all you should care about. What she showed here was really knowing the audience. She was speaking, of course, to mostly black, and she threw out a reference to Latino voters, but she was also speaking to a white audience. There's so much subtle stuff going on in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Audience sovereignty is a really important point, and it's something that's reflected in a lot of the messaging work that we do at Change Research and that other great firms are also doing, which is ensuring that the hero of your message is the voter. We don't want to do too much of putting the candidate on the pedestal, right? Because then it just becomes all about them. We want it to be about you. We want it to be about you and the power that you have and the motivation that you feel and the dreams and the aspirations that you are playing on in casting your vote for a particular person. So perfect alignment there in terms of what we would recommend and what our research has validated is the best approach. Put the voter at the center of the story, and whatever story you're trying to tell, make them the hero. And that, I think, speaks to your point about the fact that white people are a co-audience for this message. They get to be the hero of this message along with everybody else, right? We fundamentally believe that there is more that brings us together than separates us. We don't want any of that anymore. We don't want that division. We don't want that hatred. We want to come together. That really allows white people to hear in that message, I am part of the solution. Donald Trump is the problem. The other thing I want to point out in terms of what I see reflected in that fantastic debate answer is some of the realities that we're seeing in our polling, which is that are really eager to protect margins and run them up wherever possible, specifically with men of color, and even more specifically with Black men. Black women are, on average, more staunch supporters of a Democratic candidate, and they are definitely behind Kamala Harris. We must earn everyone's vote and fight for everyone's vote. Listen again to the anecdotes or the specific examples that she's giving in that answer. They have a lot to do with Black men. Obama and the birtherism, the Central Park 5, the exonerated 5. I think that is a deliberate choice that she is making there.
That's such a great point, that there's that subtlety in there. And again, it speaks to knowing your audience. Maybe the most useful principle, if you learn one thing and one thing only about effective persuasion, it all comes down to the acronym CARD. This was the most useful thing that I ever learned, that there are 4 types of attitude change: CARD, conversion, activation, reinforcement, and deactivate. And what Kamala is doing subtly in this answer is she's using different elements, different approaches with different audiences. For Black voters, and particularly, as you're pointing out, for Black men, it's about activation, using storytelling, another core persuasion principle, to send a message that Donald Trump has horrible biases against Black men. And that is activating. We know that right now, Kamala Harris has not yet made up the full ground compared to Biden in 2020 with Black voters and particularly Black men. And this is her mission in this communication, is activation, try to reach those voters. At the same time, it's a different part of the acronym for white voters. It's about deactivation. Already an implicit bias for white voters that a Black politician might not represent them. And what she does here is she deactivates that fear by using liking, empathy, and listening. I'm just throwing out this idea that she travels the country. She's listening to people, and she's incredibly empathetic. She's saying, I look at the people that I'm speaking with, and I do not see an enemy. I have empathy for where you're coming from. This so connects to Barack Obama's convention speech and the deactivation language that was just dripping through his speech. And, the liking, the fact that I go and meet with people. I like you. I like you. I'm not going to judge you. She's crediting white voters. You're not racists. You're not. It's okay. It's okay. And that can lead to one final one I want to throw out here: reciprocation. Reciprocation is incredibly powerful in persuasion. And by offering this set of kind of praiseful psychological goodies to the audience, it invokes a certain amount of, you like us, you're crediting us with good things, we're going to do that right back at you. It's just, in that 1 minute that we played, it's just so chock full of powerful stuff. I think we have to get to our final set of clips. We're going to chop down the closing statements from each of them to just the core here. And I'm going to do this out of order. I'm going to put Trump first, even though in reality he got to go last, because I don't want to give him the last word, not even here. So let's take a look at this one final clip.
Saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughed. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world.
I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
In the closing, Donald Trump was using some psychology. There are things that could have been effective. I'm not just in the tank here. So tell me what you saw, what you took away from both of those, and what you think was more effective.
Yeah, I mean, of course he did this part better. This is the part that you memorize. He sort of took the traditional approach of what you do when you were trying to attack an incumbent, because he's trying to paint her as an incumbent. He's trying to say that she's Biden. He's trying to make her own everything that's unpopular about Biden and about things that Biden has done. I almost wish she had repeated the line, but she had a line earlier in the debate where she said, well, I'm obviously not Joe Biden, and I'm not Donald Trump either. What I represent is a new generation of leadership. That's essentially the heart of her closing statement in response is, I am a change candidate, and I am for you. The point of this whole conversation, this whole debate, this whole election is you. What can I do for you? And she harkens back to what she told voters at the beginning when she sort of let them in on the secret behind the curtain. He is only focused on himself. That's all you're going to hear him talk about. You're going to hear me talk about you. So I think that she executed that quite well.
What jumped out to me from Trump's answer was there's a subtle invoke of scarcity. Scarcity is very powerful in marketing. Limited seating left for theater shows, or only, act now, 15 minutes to go for this special offer, whatever it is. The idea of scarcity And there's a sense of that, and it connects to an economic psychology principle of loss aversion. This whole idea that America is a failing nation. We are losing what we had. This is the whole theme of Donald Trump's MAGA appeal to people. This idea that we economically and psychologically value something that we have and we are afraid of losing much more than a potential gain. And I will credit him with the fact that can be extremely powerful, this sense that things are slipping away. We are being laughed at. Now, I think there's a little bit of embedded psychology of his in that. Like, the idea of being laughed at is so scary to Donald Trump that he thinks that's going to be more powerful for the audience than it probably is. But he's still connecting to the idea that the America we value, the things that you value in your own life, they're getting yanked away. And he's going to stop that. That could work. It has worked in the past. On the other hand, Kamala Harris, she's trying to grab the change mantle, about the future, about investment, and above all, unity and deactivating that fear gradient that comes with change. And she does represent some change. She does. So I think what she did worked. I think that there is going to be some appeal for some voters to what he did as well.
What I'll note, though, because I think you're exactly right, but the fundamental thing that he is trying to appeal to in terms of values and concerns, I would argue, is shared amongst the entire electorate. It's just a question of sort of who they blame for the problem and what they think the solution might look like. Because we at Change did a deep dive on this idea of voter nostalgia over the summer. This idea and we found that it's very pervasive and widespread, this idea that our best days are kind of behind us and that the things that we were seeing improvement on have started to backslide. And that's such a broad principle that has pretty universal buy-in, but then partisanship sort of creates that filter through which you perceive what of that backsliding actually represents progress versus something that we need to be worried about, right? So women's rights slipping away is a fundamental problem for Democrats and for democratically minded people. To Republicans, to some Republicans, not all of them, but a segment of Republicans who are happy to see Roe gone, well, perhaps they're interpreting that as a good thing. And I think what Kamala was doing throughout is speaking to the economic piece of the nostalgia, which is this idea that what my parents' generation achieved is not available to me anymore. And wealth is just concentrating more and more at the top. And I can't buy a home, and I can't afford a car seat, and I can't do all the things that the prior generation was able to do. And it's not because I'm not trying. So I think that broad idea of loss aversion, to your point, is definitely impactful here. But I would argue that it's impactful across the spectrum, and they're both doing their best to play into it, but with very different visions for the future.
Two things. First of all, as someone with an increasing amount of white hair on my head, I very much connect to the idea that one's best days are behind you. And of course, I know who to blame for that. Thanks, Obama. Second of all, I think you've landed us on the perfect conclusion for this, because all along this miniseries was about connecting what we do most of the time, you as a pollster, me as an analyst and a veteran of campaigns in Capitol Hill, and taking it into a different realm and connecting to psychology, persuasion, what's happening individually inside the brain. And I think what you just said about those closing statements and how they invoke powerful psychological principles, but you and Change Research are working all the time with campaigns, with advocacy organizations to try to figure out, okay, how do we provide psychological counterweights, persuasion, and rhetorical techniques that allow us to tap into those same deep wells of emotion that Americans are clearly feeling and make them work in favor of the things and the people we all believe in. And that's really what this show is all about. So it's been an absolute pleasure to do this mini-series with you, Dr. Lauren Goldstein. And I will say to the folks who have been listening and watching out there, thank you. We appreciate it. And we are still definitely looking for your feedback. We've heard from a number of folks. We are open for your ideas on whether we do a little bit more of this in the future. But for now, for Lauren, I'm Matt, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you.